Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Anime Review. I'm Zach Reese, your host. Joining me today is Nusha.
Yo,
Deanna could make it this episode. She started to feel a little sick. Her throat's been bothering her, and so instead, it's just going to be you and me this go around. But I should say that I did. She did give us all the notes that she made for the show, for the shows that she saw, and so despite the fact that she's not here, we'll try to get as much of her notes as we possibly can. So, on that note, we'll go ahead and get right into it. So, we're recapping the week. So, obviously, we've got all these different shows here. Actually, when I just to think about it, I think I might avoid making mentioning notes for shows that only she saw, or at least talking about them, just because I think if it's just a one-sided conversation, it'd be kind of awkward. So I'm actually gonna leave those off here. Instead, just go with the shows that you guys can see here on the video. So, Nusha, you're watching most of the shows that she's already watching. I think only Golden Kamuy 2 is the only show that you're not seeing, if I'm not mistaken.
I think Bloom into you as well.
Yeah, blooming to you. Okay, yeah, we'll be skipping over that this week as well. But next week I'll just have Deanna kind of catch things up pretty quickly for people who wanted to know her thoughts about that. But I figured it'd be best if it came from her mouth and not mine. But I will, of course, like I said, share the notes regarding her thoughts on the episode, so at least you get something to bounce off of Nusha and myself as well, because I'm watching some show she is as well. So let's get right into it. Like I said, we'll start with, as we always, with alphabetical order, and we'll begin with Banana Fish. And so, I'm blanking on this person's name, but he seems to be the person that everyone keeps saying it will play a more important role. So, Nusha, why don't you kind of give us the setup for this episode?
He definitely does play a more important role in this episode. So, last week we learned that Blanca, Ash's old mentor, is on his tail. He was hired by Golzine for some unknown reason that we learn about this episode, and it turns out that his real target is actually Eiji. Uh, Eiji walks into a room and is grazed by a sniper shot. And Ash is quick to protect him and nurse him back to health. And he basically is called out by Golzine, Yue, and Blanca to go meet them and hand over all the information they have on Banana Fish and to kind of hand over all the information they have on Golzine and his like underworld dealings so they can clear his name. And Ash, knowing how strong and how apt Blanca is for assassination, knows that he's no match for him. And he goes, "Okay, I have no choice. I have to head over and just hand over everything we got." And so he meets him in like this abandoned like garage or warehouse or something, and he comes face to face with Yue, who clearly is still hung up on how much Ash cares for Eiji, and he's kind of holding Ash at gunpoint, and he says, uh, "If you take this gun and you shoot yourself in the head right now, I can promise you that we will not harm Eiji. He will remain safe."
Holy
And
shit.
Ash fucking takes the gun, puts it to his head, and pulls the trigger immediately. And there's no bullet in the gun. And Yue's like, "Bro, what the fuck are you doing?" Like,
Shit.
I wasn't serious. Like, they were testing him to see if he would actually do it, and they were planning for him to be like, "I can't do that," but he just takes the gun and like immediately tries to off himself
Oh,
because the
badass.
clear choice, yeah, the clear choice for him is to do whatever he can to protect this guy. And Yue kind of loses his composure and he's like, "Why are you going to such like extreme lengths to protect this kid?" But eventually, like, their real motive comes out, like I mentioned before, which is they want to have Ash hand over all the information he has on Banana Fish. And so basically he has no choice but to go along because Blanca's involved. But before they leave, Ash basically challenges Blanca to a fight. He goes, "I just want to hit him in the face one time for coming back and causing all this shit." And then Blanca goes, "Okay, everyone give me like a moment alone with Ash to talk to him." And so they have this quick little scuffle. Blanca's quick to kick the shit out of Ash
Does
because
he
again, he taught him.
does he crouch over and charge electricity?
That's exactly what he does. He rolls up into a ball and launches himself like a cannon.
Holy shit. Sorry. Every
And
time you guys mention Blanca, I can't help it. But okay.
as a Street Fighter player, I'm the same way. So yeah, he double perfects Ash and
As you do.
and basically it's revealed later that Ash kind of knew this was going to be the result. He only challenged Blanca to this fight because he wanted to have this word with him alone. because we established earlier, he even says, like, if Blanca's involved, there's nothing I can do. So what's the point? And
Mm,
so him challenging him to a fight seemed odd
yeah.
until you realize at the end he was doing this just so he can beg him one more time not to harm Eiji. And so Blanca pretty much tells him he can't do that, that it would be in his best intent or in his best interest if he went along with Golzine and just remained his like submissive kind of pet, because that would be the only way he can remain safe. Like we even have this flashback where Blanca meets Ash, and he basically saw right off the bat, like, the only way this kid's gonna lead a happy life is if he lives in this underground underworld society, because he's already seen so much shit. And so the only thing I can do to raise this kid is to teach him how to live in this world. And so he basically gives him this speech about how everyone has like these roles and a lot in life that they have to follow,
Mm,
and that it would be in his best interest to just follow that lot in life, that going after things like AG and trying to escape this life is just going to cause him more harm than good. And Ash basically tells him he can't do that because, yeah, he can live a happy life with Gozine, but, well, quote unquote happy, but everything he receives from him would be fake and nothing like the genuine care that he gets from people like Shorter and AG, who love him unconditionally and want nothing in return. And so that's basically where the 2 characters have a falling out, but it was nice to see that their relationship, Blanca and Ash's, wasn't just, like a mentor and a student. It was almost like a deranged father-son relationship. Like,
yeah.
in his own way, Blanca's trying to do what he thinks is good for this kid who's just seen so much in his life. And so, yeah, it's never been more apparent that Ash is 200% ready to just throw his life away if it means protecting this kid he met like only a couple months ago. But yeah, the episode basically ends with him doing exactly what Golzine tells him to do. He holds Max at gunpoint and takes the information for Banana Fish, and Max, being the great character he is, basically tells him, "Hey, I understand why you're doing this. Take the information and go help your friend," because we've
Mm.
seen that he also lost his friend in war and that he was unable to protect him and that he still carries that burden. And so he would be the first person to understand why Ash is doing what he's doing, something that seems so self-destructive, but to help a friend out. So he hands over all the information to Golzine and is taken away. And at this moment, it seems we are completely thrown back to square one. So we'll see where it continues next week.
Well, on that note, then let me go ahead and share some of the notes that Deanna gave to me.
Oh, they're
Um,
a riot. I read some of them.
yeah, I mean, I was trying hard not to laugh when you were trying to explain the episode because she likes to use emphasis in her notes, and so a lot of capitalization and all stuff. So yeah, first note: imagine having tea on a nice day, and then a storm just fucking blows through and destroys everything. That was this week's episode. Starts off sweet and
She's not
domestic,
wrong.
yeah, and like they're cooking breakfast, and then yeah, as you said, AG gets shot. And then it kind of goes from there. Yep. Once again, Ash does this without any hesitation whatsoever to protect AG. So that happens. Let's see here. It goes through that. Ash, of course, is going to follow through, but doesn't tell Edgy. But Edgy knows you can't lie to him. That's definitely what I got from what you were talking about. And Edgy tells Ash about where he's from, and asks him to go visit Japan with him once everything's done. And you already know that this is another death flag. Yeah, that's a pretty
Yep.
obvious death
Yep.
flag from that. Yeah, the talk about the flashback scene. Um, let's see here. The boy pleads to Blanca not to kill Eiji. He loves Eiji so much. Ash loves Eiji. Then the ending, seeing Eiji run out of the apartment in his PJs, trying to look for Ash while Ash looks from afar in a car. Too much hurt right now. Shout out to Max for continuing to be the best dad. Like you said, he's willing to give up the information to help his friend. Um, and so, yeah. And then it just kind of goes off about how Ash has an agonized expression. And so her basic summary is that I thought the pacing for this episode was very fast, like everything was happening so suddenly, and I'm getting whiplash and heart palpitations at the same time. I'm going to pretend that only the sweet Ash Agey moments. She puts them together, so it's just like Ash Agey. So I guess they're like, like Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, that
Their
like back
couple
then.
name.
Exactly. Moments happen and nothing else. Everyone is safe and happy. Just kidding. I can't. I need to see Golzine rotting in a ditch somewhere. Yes. That's the kind of summary that I got from that show as well. Honestly, like you guys explained the show so well that I'm learning a lot about the show myself. Not even I'm not watching it, so it's been a hell of a ride from everything you guys have talked about.
Oh yeah, and I think there's still like 6 episodes left or something, so there's a
Y-
lot more to enjoy.
Yeah, you guys obviously are we're only halfway through the season, as it were. And so, speaking of hell of a ride, let's get into Double Decker. This great Franz Ferdinand cover art, like they repurposed for their own art. So I thought that was pretty great. Um, So yeah, let me actually make sure I got Deanna's notes as well because I'm kind of curious on that. So, okay, yeah, it looks like her stuff is kind of what I already had. So yeah, the gist of it is that so we learned last week that Doug's brother um, ends up being excuse me, it was supposed to be his Doug's sister ends up being his brother because apparently his brother cross-dressed all those years, I guess. Um, so moving on from that revelation, they don't dwell on it for much. Honestly, like they don't talk about him for the rest of the episode, which I think for the best because there's a lot else going on here worth looking at. And so we learn that Doug, I'm sorry, I messed up the names. Kirill's brother is the one that I was talking about that who's actually a brother, not a sister. Doug is the more mature partner who's also an asshole. I keep messing up their names. So Doug is looking for a man named Good Looking Joe. So this show does the unusual step of stretching out details regarding this man, but it's easy to assume that he's the one that killed his partner, Pat Marino, the one that he's been kind of talking about since Doug and Kirill first met. So this is like in the past they kind of just speed things up and quickly get through the pacing. They don't really dwell on anything. Like I said, they just straight up went up and decided to dedicate the entire episode for this manhunt that he's on. So don't get me wrong. I appreciate the gravity they're giving the situation, but it feels like we have to sort of readjust based on how important facts have been presented thus far. Like the Kirill's sister being actually his brother. That revelation that was done like in like a couple seconds. It was pretty quick. So it's weird that they're doing it this way. So it turns out Pat, Doug's partner, is in fact a 12-year-old orphan girl who died because she applied the wrong shoe polish to Joe's shoes. So yeah, like for something as ridiculous as that, this information broker as she was, that's when Doug supposedly started hating poverty and hating class differences. You mentioned before, me and Dan have talked about before about how he's got this very, more high ground when it comes to these things. And so that was a big part of that. And there was sort of divine intervention when Doug finally approaches good-looking Joe and pulls out the pistol that he had previously given to Pat, who decided like I'm not going to use a gun. Just take this back. I don't want this gun. I don't want to be involved in all this stuff. It's like you're a cop. You're not supposed to be doing that. You're supposed to be a good guy. And so Doug pulls out the gun and would use that to shoot Joe, but it ends up blowing up in his hands. Like he tries to shoot Joe, but it blows up before he can deal the fatal bullet. So I'm kind of glad, at least, that despite all that going on, the show didn't try to pull a fast one at the end and tell us that Pat has been alive all along, like they did with Derek, who was Doug's other partner that everyone thought had died, but it turns out he runs a bar. So in this episode, though, Pat is definitely gone, and so I'm really happy that the show can pull off a more serious tone and not suffer from it. It's the qualities of a strong production when they're able to do something like that, and so I appreciated it for willing to do so. So let me move on to Deanna's notes regarding this episode. So yeah, just talking about the plot twist. She really liked how Doug's first partner, a 12-year-old orphan, not only because you wouldn't expect it, but because it brought our attention back to Doug's reasoning for being a detective to end class and poverty, like I talked about. Pat basically changed his views about being a detective. She also loved the epiphany that Doug has when Kirill says the gun misfired, probably because Pat didn't want revenge to happen. She seemed like even if she was involved in this type of scene, she still wanted to help people. It's not about trying to help the bad guys; it's helping the good people. And so, yeah, this episode had very little comedic moments, but she did enjoy that small bit when Travis talks to Kirill about revenge, and then they run to the car to go after Doug. He was like, "You almost had, you almost talked me out of it." So yeah, there's this big band about that kind of stuff, and so they're trying to stop each other. In the episode, she also feels like with this episode, it felt a little bit rushed. So much of the suspense thinned out, but she's still glad that we learned about Doug's partner, and now we can finally move toward with a clear mindset on how to handle Esperanza. And yeah, next episode, she said we're finally going to learn about Max. Max is the person with the blonde hair and the buzzed like undercut like on the sides. That's the person that she thought implied that there's some sort of lesbian relationship going on with two of the people. One is Max. One happens to be the android, I guess. She's an android, but all she says is the gays are coming. So that's gonna happen. I'm glad too because Max has got is an interesting character, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. So yeah, got that to look forward to. Moving on, another show that I've been watching, Gegege no Kitaro. Like I mentioned last week, I could not watch the previous the episode. Excuse me. I got something in my throat. I couldn't watch that episode because I was doing Extra Life 2018, which is a 24-hour charity marathon, and so I was playing in the middle of the most recent episode premiering at that point. So this is kind of a summary of the two episodes. I've only got one image because episode 31 was a really dumb episode, and I can't. It's like easily forgettable. It's about Azuki Beans and how Ratman is trying to exploit three yokai into making him money by making them go on YouTube and making videos becoming popular, and then turning that around and making Azuki Beans popular again because these three yokai were being neglected and they didn't like that. It was kind of off the wall and kind of silly at times, but I also think it was trying to make up for the fact that the more recent episodes have been pretty dark. But I just didn't care for it. I pretty much skipped it after a little bit, and I've yet to skip an episode of Kitaro, so it kind of goes to show that that was kind of unwelcome. At least with episode 32, which is what this image is from, things are a little more interesting. And so there's a Western demon known as Belial, who had his powers sealed over 100 years ago, and now he just gets by selling magazines he found in a trash can on the sidewalk. Like, even a couple cops show up. It's like, all right, you got to move away, sir. So yeah, he's just all obviously down on his luck. This guy, he used to be this all-powerful person. Apparently, he was like a Portuguese sailor who came to dominate different lands. Like, that's a very Western look at, like, oh yeah, this demon. like he's pretty much the Christopher Columbus, as he were. So it just so happens though that the Tengu that we had met several episodes ago, that helped Mana when she had visited her father on his island. He has a bit of a thing for Mana, and while trying to show off his power, he knocks down this crystal that contains that demon's power, Belial's power. And so, through the course of all this happening, through the power of love, they literally say that the power of love because she was reading, Mana was reading a Shonen Ai manga before this, like at the beginning of the episode. So it's like, yeah, this relationship between an Oni and a human, it'll never work. And she believes, like, through the power of love, it can work. But she's so oblivious that she doesn't know that that Tengu has a thing for her. So, in any case, the Tengu ends up defeating this evil power, this evil man, and sealing him back. So, yeah, it was just it's like we're in the middle of like a bunch of filler episodes, but I thought that was kind of silly. I thought that was going on, and the Tengu happens to be one of my more one of the more likable characters in the series, and so I didn't mind them going down this route, even if it doesn't seem like the thing between him and Mana are ever gonna come to be. So, but it was pretty adorable nonetheless. All right, I can talk about the next show then that I can talk about that.
Deep breath.
Iroduku, The World in Colors. So, as we talked about last week, yeah, Deanna dropped this show. A lot of it had to do with the fact that the director of this series also directed Nagino Asakara, which is, for people who don't know, it's about a bunch of people who live next to the sea, and like it's like mermaids and mermen like coming up on the surface to go to school with a bunch of other kids, and there's all these different relationships that blossom as a result. But it turns out mostly to be how have like there's two people in a relationship, then there's three people, like there's a love triangle, there's a love quadrilateral, there's a love octagon, like there's all these things going on where it's like this person has a thing for this person who has a thing for this person who has a thing for this person who has a thing for this. It keeps going on like that. I will say at least that the show pulled things back a little bit, and so I might be the only one watching the show going forward. But I'm glad at least it didn't lean too much into the stuff that's been really upsetting. That makes me really groan out loud. Um, I'm giving it another chance. Uh, Things start off kind of rough because Asagi, who is the childhood friend of Sho, the president that we talked about from the photography club, caught Hitomi, who's the main girl in this series, walking with Sho and got the wrong idea. And so immediately I was like, oh no, stop this shit.
Mm.
Um,
It's the misunderstandings, the classic
yeah,
misunderstandings.
the classic misunderstandings that, and she's upset with him and all this stuff. But it's weird. Like there's like a little bit of a whiplash because they're upset with each other, and then the next day they're perfectly fine around each other. I don't know. So after a day of playing dress up, where they're taking photos, like they're dressed in this old like Victorian garb or something like that, like old classical style. Hitomi sees Aoi, it was the boy, drawing before she is suddenly transported inside one of his drawings. She notices this shadow that's chasing after the golden fish that we have seen a number of times through Aoi's drawings. That's the one in this image right now. It's that golden fish. It turns out that that fish is from a piece that he drew in grade school that won an award, and so clearly there's something from his childhood that left a mark. And so after Hitomi reveals that she entered Aoi's drawing and saw something that was apparently deeply personal to Aoi, he gets upset with her. However, I'm glad at least that they don't dwell on that too much. They said after, feeling bad over the whole situation, he makes up for it by telling Hitomi that he'll finally draw something for her. It's something that she's been wanting him to do for the entire series. And so at this point, Hitomi kind of experiences an event with the golden fish where it it swims right past her, and then all of a sudden the whole world comes back into color for her. So whereas in the past she could only see in black and white, now color's been returned to her, what she didn't have since, I think, since birth. I mean, maybe for like the longest time at least. I forget how long it's been, but it definitely was affecting her in the future as well. So who's to say what will happen from here on? But I'm hoping it doesn't become another confusing romance story. That's for sure. So, yeah. And she didn't leave it in notes, so that's a confirmation that she did drop it. So, yeah. Just generally speaking, it's like I'm trying to give the show as much as I can, and I'm not trying to be a big downer about it. But as after watching 2 seasons of Nagi no Asakara and being so extremely bummed out with how it ended up in the second season, I'm just being kind of a little anxious about it, a little nervous about where things are going. So hopefully it fixes itself. Because I hate for them to go down this road where you can't have like a romance unless you've got a dozen people all fighting for the same people. It just doesn't have to be that way. So we'll move on from that to something a little bit more exciting. This is how it usually goes. Like we're getting a little bummed out, and then Nusha comes in with some JoJo. So let's talk about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure: Golden Wind and this cool-looking alien dude that I can't recognize at all.
That is Abakio's stand. Last week we ended with like in the heat of battle, Abakio finally realizes that he needs to use his stand to figure out the mysteries behind who's attacking them on the yacht. And this episode, we actually jumped right into his origin story, which was an interesting choice because I believe the manga actually threw this backstory much, much later in part five. But the anime, I guess, decided to throw it right before his first like main battle. And I think that was a really strong move on their part, but I can get into that a little later. Starting off, basically, Abakio was a cop. It was always his dream to become a policeman and kind of protect people and keep people safe. But it was very quick that he realized that there were a lot of contradictions in the world of being an officer. There were a lot of citizens who didn't appreciate you for not solving certain crimes. There were a lot of
Oh.
criminals who quickly got out of jail by posting bail or using their connections with like the gangs and the mobs to get out. And it was very quick for him to realize that he wasn't really making the change that he had hoped for when he dreamed of becoming a cop. And so he runs into this man who is soliciting the services of a prostitute, and he's about to arrest him before the man offers him a bribe. And
Mm,
basically, yeah, you can see where this is going. In
yeah.
his mind, he goes, "Well, it's either I take this bribe now and he does what he does, or he goes to jail and is, thrown out of jail because of his connections to the gang or to some big mob boss, and he's just going to be on this street later soliciting the same services." And he's like, "Well, might as well wet my beak while I'm at it, right?" And so he takes the bribe. And
Damn it.
yeah, right. It's always the good men.
Yeah, it's like
Uh,
he got corrupted.
exactly, yeah. And so a few days later, there's a very Spider-Man-esque, scenario where he runs into the same criminal, but he has now killed a store owner when he was trying to rob, his, like, register. And he quickly pulls out his gun, points it at the criminal, and he goes, "Well, think about this. If you throw me into jail, first thing I'm gonna do is tell people that you were taking bribes, and there goes your job." And so he
Ooh.
hesitates for a second, and that's the moment the criminal needs. He pulls out his gun, fires at Abakio, and Abakio's partner jumps in the way of the bullet and shoots his own at the criminal, disarming him. But unfortunately, Abakio's partner dies. And so the
Oof.
criminal's arrested, his partner's dead, and Abakio, of course, loses his job because the criminal did rat him out for taking the bribe. And so naturally he falls into despair, he becomes a drunk, his hair grows out, he becomes all disheveled until he's found by Bruno, the member of Passione who is now his leader. And we cut back to the present and we see Abakio finally uses his stand, Moody Blues, which
It's a good name.
is a stand. It is a really good name,
It's
and
basically the
the
name of a
stand
band, also. But yeah.
hmm,
Eh.
a stand and so the stand basically has the ability to replicate anyone, like, shapeshift into anyone and replay their actions from the past. Any amount of time that he wants, he can replay the actions of that person in the past. So he basically Narancia, the first member of their team that was mysteriously taken away by this stand user, he has his stand copy Narancia's form and reenact what he was doing 5 minutes prior to being captured. And so what they find out is that basically the stand pops out and it has like this little tiny rapier and it pokes Narancia and basically pops and deflates him like a balloon.
All right.
And
Okay.
'cause that's
Whatever.
that Stan's ability,
That makes
and
sense.
so he, like yeah, he deflates like a balloon and becomes very, like, thin and malleable, and he's able to, like, hide and do the same thing with his body and hide both of them within, like, the cracks in the yacht. So,
That's so dumb.
it
That's so dumb.
welcome to JoJo's.
Yeah, that's yeah.
But, yeah, it's a strange ability for sure. But despite knowing what the ability is, they're still having a very hard time finding the stand user. And although they discovered what its ability is, Abakio is still unable to avoid being captured himself because his stand doesn't really have much combat capability. It's mostly for like solving mysteries like this. And so he gets captured as well. And the only one who's left now is Bruno. And basically, the the stand user is able to speak to Bruno, tells him, "Hey, tell me where Pulpo's fortune is, and I'll give you back your team. Otherwise, of course, I'm gonna start killing your team members." Um, and eventually, I forget how it's done. Bruno is able to. Oh, that's right. If you thought that the explanation of this Stan's ability was dumb, wait till you hear this.
Oh.
Um,
Mm.
Bruno is able to determine that how they're riding on a yacht.
Yeah.
Um, basically, what the stand user did is he used his stand to pop another yacht and deflate it like a balloon and threw it over the yacht that they were riding, basically coating a yacht with a deflated yacht and
Okay.
and was hiding between the 2 yachts when he was deflating, Bruno's team members and, like, hiding underneath the boat, and that's why they weren't able to find him. And so,
All right.
discovering this,
So dumb.
Bruno's able to Bruno's able to separate the 2 yachts and is quickly able to defeat Zucchero, the owner of the stand that was attacking them. And basically that's where the episode ends. The team is gonna revert back to normal and they can continue searching for Pulpo's fortune. And so, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
JoJo's definitely kicks up the bizarreness every episode, every stand
I see what you
ability.
did there.
Yeah, it's not that clever anymore. I made that
Oh,
joke
okay.
like 4 times, I think. But, yeah, it was a great episode nonetheless because I think we got a lot of good development for Abakio as a character, and I mentioned before that it was nice that they threw his backstory here before he first revealed his stand because there's a very noticeable parallel between how he's constantly thinking about his past and his past actions and how they costed the life of someone dear to him, and his stand's ability is to literally relive the past, to replicate people and see what they were doing moments before they were killed. And it also kind of fits into his profession as a cop, a detective who would solve these mysteries, and his stand very much lends itself to that. And so I thought that was a nice little adaptation done by David to the Part 5 manga, and they've been doing a lot of these neat changes that have really been only making the source material better in my eyes, so I really do appreciate all the hard work they're doing, not just to create something old fans can enjoy, but something something new fans can enjoy, but something old fans can also enjoy more when they go back and see, like, a more refined version of the source material they fell in love with. Aside from that, Moody Blues, when it first appears, they did this really neat sound design trick where he pops up and, like, stands usually have these crazy sound effects, but when Moody Blues pops up, it's like the sound of a tape being rewound, like when
Oh,
cops are looking through tapes and, like, they do the whole stop, enhance, whatever, whatever. It's like those noises are playing instead of, like, the classic stand screams and sound effects, and I thought that was a really neat sound design trick, and that's definitely
oh,
something JoJo's has always had above other anime is its crazy sound design, so
I'm gonna have
despite
to.
how
Yeah,
ridiculous the stand was, it was still a very enjoyable episode, and I think next week we're gonna be focusing more on Mista, who's one of my favorites, so I'm definitely excited to check that out.
yeah. I'm gonna have to listen to that sound that you're talking about after this. After we are done with this episode, because that sounds pretty crazy.
You should, it's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it needs to be able to appeal to the newcomers because, like me watching Gegege no Kitaro, it's like I'm not going to go back and watch a ton of episodes. I'd rather just know what it's like now, and then if I'm so inclined, I'll go back and enjoy it
Mhm.
at that point. But based on what you've been talking about so far, it's a lot of JoJo, a lot of what
Yeah.
makes that show so good. I've only heard great things about Golden Wind as well, so obviously you're part of that group too. So it's good to know. It's good to know it's keeping it up. Let's move on
Oh,
to
yeah.
something that's been exciting. To something that, based on what you said, is slightly disappointing, and that's Katakuri Circus. Not to say that the episode itself, I imagine, wasn't disappointing, but some revelations, which I've been using that word a lot, but it kind of applies here too. So, talk to us about this most recent episode of Karakuri Circus.
Yeah, Revelations works pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like
Mm-hmm.
since episode 1 of this show or episode 1, I was so stoked and hyped for it, and I feel like with every episode that comes out, I kind of fall off more and more and more, which is kind of a shame, but basically the plot or the synopsis, I guess, is last week I mentioned Narumi dies. Uh that's kind of where we leave off. And unfortunately, this episode starts with a 2-month time skip. So we don't even get
Mm.
to see the morning. We don't even get to see the reactions to the death. We just cut to 2 months later, and uh, Masaru is basically going back to school. Shirogane is also going to a school nearby his, like next door, so she can keep an eye on him. But as far as they're concerned, no one's really after his fortune anymore because that estate exploded. His uncle is essentially dead, the only man who wanted to capture him. And so basically, they think they're in the clear. And so we're kind of going back to slice of life territory for these characters. Um, Masaru goes back to school. He mentioned earlier in the series that he had bullies, and we see the bullies come up again,
Ah.
and they're trying really hard to get this kid to crack, but learning what he learned from Narumi about how important it is to just smile through life and just kind of take everything on the chin and keep a cheery attitude. We see that help him a lot. These kids are trying to bully him, but he just kind of smiles through it and doesn't let it get to him, and that just kind of aggravates the bullies to no end. And this basically results in this really bizarre scene where the bullies try and get at him one more time. He laughs, nothing really happens, and they ask him like what happened, and he explains that over summer he basically just tells them everything that happened.
The
I got
context
this.
to these bullies, what
Yeah,
do they care? It's like they don't really
exactly.
want to
He's
know.
like, I got this fortune. My family tried to kill me, and this man died trying to protect me. And he like takes off his like school shirt or like uniform or whatever, and he's like riddled in scars and bruises from like the events of that summer. And it was just a really weird scene.
You're
Like
giving
this
the
is just a
bullies
regular.
fuel to make fun of you about.
No, I mean, like, the kids are like, "Oh my god, like, he went through so much shit. This
Scarred
kid's
them.
really changed." And it's like, this is just a regular middle school, and there's just this kid who drops,
Dude,
like,
I'm
his
fucking
shirt and
12. What the hell?
yeah,
It's like,
and he's talking about how, like, puppets were running after him and, like, killing his friends and, like, how his uncle was trying to adopt him for,
that's
like, a
fucked up,
crazy.
man.
It's so bizarre, and it's like a clashing between, like, the fantasy aspects of this show and, like, the realistic aspects of this show. Like, he's just in a regular school, and he's explaining, like, a shonen plot, and it's just
It's
so
like, did you draw those on? I mean, is this like an episode of Dragon Ball Z? Like, what the fuck?
it was so
I
strange,
don't think
and,
I'd
like
believe him either. So,
yeah, it was definitely just, like, a clash. It was, like, almost like a genre clash. It was weird, but yeah, that happens. The kids stop bullying him for some reason. Um,
I, for now,
yeah, for now, we'll see.
there's a pattern. Yeah.
Um, basically, Shirogane is also dealing with a bit of the repercussions of what happened from that summer. She still is unable to smile or show any real emotion, and she very much holds herself accountable for Narumi's death because before it happened, he was having another one of those um, attacks where he needs to make someone laugh or else he has like a seizure, and she was unable to smile for him because she's just so trained to toss out all emotion, and she basically faults herself for causing his death. And so not Narumi, Masaru sees this and tries to cheer her up, and he does this by finding like this really small, dingy, rundown circus in town that is like on the brink of being closed down, and basically has her hired at the circus because I guess she likes performing in the circus despite her very traumatic experiences handling puppets and doing what she did. But,
Yeah, it's a lot of confusing
yeah.
messages in this show. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it definitely is, and the pacing doesn't help either, and so that happens, and, of course, we cut to another cliffhanger, and this time we see Narumi, he's in a dark darkly lit room, and he's, like, being bandaged up, and he's got a robotic arm, so we can assume he's alive, and I don't know, just they didn't even let us sit with his death for an episode before they're like, "Haha, just kidding." And I feel like at this point, like, the thing is I want to watch next week's episode, and it's not because I'm enjoying it. It's literally because they hit me with another cliffhanger. It's like, you know how when you watch like a soap, what do you call this? Soap operas?
Yeah.
Um,
What do you
they're
call it?
not particularly good plots. You're literally sitting there because every 15 minutes they hit you with, "My lover's my cousin," or like, "Oh my god, he's in a coma and he came out and doesn't have any of his memories." And
It's
it's
a
like
pretty good episode, honestly. But yeah, that's no,
but you know
I
what I
totally get
mean?
that. Yeah,
They're like
it's what
it's
keeps
like
you
junk
going.
food.
Yeah. Uh,
It's like that's the only reason I'm watching it at this point, but,
That's why it's hard for
yeah,
me to drop shows too. I mean, same feelings. It's like, okay,
yeah,
well, maybe I'll. It's like you give them too many chances, and then suddenly it's like, well, I'm almost near the end. I guess I'll have to keep. It's like Angels of Death. It's kind of a good comparison. It's like,
exactly.
well, I kind of hate myself, but I guess I can watch it through because maybe things will turn around. Which, speaking of which, I've yet to watch the rest of that show. But yeah, um,
Yeah. It's the same thing with I mean, hell, last season I was doing the same thing with, Muhyo and Roji. Like, every
yeah.
cliffhanger had me like, "I guess I'll sit around for the next episode," and then by the time I was like, "I've had enough," it was like, "Well, there's only 2 episodes left in the season. Might as well."
Yep.
And that's very much the situation I find myself in with this, series, and I feel like next week will be my last chance
I
with
mean,
it.
this is 36 episodes, so you got to kind of make up your mind,
I
So,
do, yeah. This would be the moment to drop it if it's like if I plan on sitting through 36 episodes of this, and I might just drop it next week if I don't like what I see and maybe pick up the manga because I read a couple chapters and the pacing is definitely a lot better.
oh yeah.
I don't know if it fixes some of the plot, but I'd rather read the manga if anything, if I was going to enjoy this source material at all. But
I imagine. I mean, I imagine it would be better about like the approach that they're taking to, speaking of bullies and stuff like that. Like, I don't. The only reason I dropped it really was just because it was 36 episodes, and I wasn't into the idea of having like two long-running shows side by side that I have to stick to and keep up
mhm.
with. I'd rather just, I'm better with the shorter shows. So, yeah, I think next episode will probably be telling. I think that's like for a lot of different shows that we're watching this season. It's been kind of this fall season's been kind of rough, all things considered.
Yeah,
But I think
which
it's
is
because,
strange. 'Cause, like, I think it had such a strong lineup, but I feel slowly week by week, all 3 of us are cutting shows down. It seems like they had a strong entrance, but then everything just kinda lost it, like, fizzled out, you know?
oh, absolutely, that's exactly the feeling that I've been getting from it, and so, I don't know, man. I don't know. We'll have to find out sooner or later. But for what it's worth, Karakuri Circus, kind of bizarre. Not as bizarre as JoJo though. All right. So moving on from that, I think this is actually. Let me make sure. Yes. Okay. So Deanna's got some notes from this next show that we could talk about, and that is Radiant. Uh, she just got some pretty crazy. I'll let you begin because I think even if it means you've been talking for quite a while, I'd rather have you start things off because you have more context than she does. So,
Yeah, that's fine.
yeah, tell us about this
Um,
episode.
will do. This week basically, last week, we met Yaga. He was a member of I forget the name of the group, but it's like the top 13 sorcerers, kinda like how One Piece has the 4 emperors and they always have like the top whatever percentile of
Yeah,
ninjas or pirates or whatever. That this is their equivalent to that. And Yaga is a member of that. And Seth is trying to become his pupil so that he can learn some more magic and eventually go to Radiant and destroy the nest where these nemesis are falling from. And so Yaga basically tells him, no, I'm not gonna train some brat who doesn't have any foundation in magic. And he's like, "Well, check this out." And he throws the Titan punch, which is with just like a strong punch that he's been throwing since the first episode. And Yaga's like, "That's not magic. You just put magic into your fist and threw a really hard punch. That's stupid." And I like threw up my arms. I was so happy because I hate that dumb little signature technique of his. It's such a dumb like I'm the main character. I punch really hard. And it's like come up with something a little more unique than that. And so
yeah, it's a
hearing Yaga
magic
like
show. Come on.
yeah. And so Yaga ripping into him for this like really uninspired move was just really cathartic for me personally.
Yeah,
And so basically he says, "Go out, learn the foundations of offense-based magic, and maybe I'll consider training you." And so Seth reaches out to Melly, who he's seen use offense-based magic, but she basically tells him that she's only able to do that if she has that personality switch. She's kind of bipolar, and if she switches to that other mindset, that's the only way she can use offense-based magic. But that's very situational. It's not something she can just like trigger. And so their next resort is to ask Doc, and I don't think Doc can use magic, but I believe he can read the grimoires that explain how magic is performed. And so they reach out to him. Uh, that doesn't work out because he explains the process, but Seth is a shonen protagonist, so he's kind of adult and an airhead,
yeah.
and he's unable to follow instructions. Um, basically, what happens is they're very frantically trying to find a way to teach Seth offense magic. This kind of triggers Melly to have her personality switch. Uh, which causes her to go on this rampage trying to quote unquote teach Seth by just hurling meteor drops, which is like the name of the attack that he's trying to learn, just like little magic beam bolts. She just kind of spams the beam bolts at him, hoping that he learns how to use it. And so they just like run
Learn,
through town.
learn.
Pretty much just like running through town, like destroying buildings and stuff, trying to learn this move. And what happens is Seth is about to get away until he notices that some debris from like an archway above Melly is about to fall on top of her, but she doesn't notice because she's so preoccupied with trying to throw these magic beams at Seth. Um, so basically, he leaps in to try and help her, realizes that his little punch move isn't going to reach her in time, and in like an act of sheer desperation, is able to finally fire off meteor drops and protect her because it's like this ranged spell. Um, so he learns how to use it, goes back to Yaga. Yaga pretty much accepts Seth as his pupil, and that's that. Um, Definitely a kind of a miss of an episode for me. Like, I've been
Mm,
really enjoying Radiant up until now. I'm still enjoying it. I'm not gonna say I'm like, I don't like it anymore, but this episode definitely felt like they tried to take one chapter in the manga and stretch it out into an entire episode, because there was this cafe scene where they were trying to convince Doc to train Seth in magic,
mhm.
and I timed it, and the thing was literally 6.5 minutes long of them just sitting in a cafe, and the only development we get from it is Doc going, "Yeah, I'll try and teach you." But the rest of it was just them cracking jokes and introducing us to this, like, waitress that Doc has a crush on, and then, like, 5 minutes later, the training with Doc doesn't even work, so that scene was kind of pointless, and just, like, 6.5 minutes dedicated to that when it's a 21-minute episode,
Yeah.
including intro and outro, and it really, really dragged, and I rarely, stop an episode and look at the timer and be like, "Wow, this feels like this has been dragging on a lot," but this episode really did do that to me, and I feel like it's contradictory because I definitely praised this series earlier for taking its time, but I feel like the first arc when they did that, they built it up and then they really paid off in dividends when there was this very emotional episode 3 where we kind of see all of that come together and we see the past between Seth and Alma, and it literally made me like tear up. It was so good.
Mm,
But I don't see that happening with this development. Like, just that 6.5 minute cafe scene was kind of egregious and not really needed. But I can definitely say the visuals of the show are still very, very on point. Especially color wise. Like, they do this thing with Melly's hair where instead of shading it just like a darker hue, they actually like tint the shade to like a light blue, and it's very reminiscent of what the actual author of the series does to the characters when he's coloring them, like on the covers.
yeah,
And I
I've seen
really do
those.
like that attention to detail.
Yeah.
So the production value's there. I do love, fantasy shonen and especially things like this and One Piece that are all about adventure and discovering new unique cultures and lands and stuff like that. So I'm definitely going to stick with this one for the long haul, but this was
Mm,
absolutely a lower ranked episode for me for sure.
yeah. Well, on that note, let me go over what Deanna talked about because it does address some things that I didn't hear you talk about. For example, she believes that Seth's gloves might actually be a limiter on his powers because it's only when his glove tore that he's able to use meteor drops. And she kind of, speculates that Yaga knows about this, but she wonders why he won't tell Seth. So that might be part of the reason why it's like it's not just that he learned this power; it's that it could be that the gloves are protecting him from having this destructive power, which is not a new thing. That's actually kind of cliche to think about. That there's like a
Mhm.
-- it's like I can't hurt the people around me. It's that kind of thing. She also wonders if Melee has always had split personality, and if she's ever communicated with her other self. It says the townspeople of Artemis seem to know about Crazy Melee, so it seems like she's wreaked havoc quite a few times in the past. She did appreciate Seth has a very positive, a happy-go-lucky attitude, and that it's refreshing to see in a shonen protagonist. I don't know if she knows about Goku, but he's pretty positive and happy-go-lucky. But
Or Luffy, or
Luffy,
Asta.
I think that's actually a lot of shonen protagonists. They're pretty happy-go-lucky, a lot of that kind of stuff. But I don't
It
know.
is done well with Seth, I will say that.
Yeah, but he doesn't fault Melly for not being able to teach him offensive magic, and he's just like, "No worries, I'll try it on my own." Okay, that's actually better. He's not whiny. It's more that he's just like I want to be able to do this on my own too.
Mhm.
Still, Seth's going to need reminders every now and then about reality, don't we all? All right. On that note, moving on from that show,
A somber way to end that.
yeah, let's talk about another somber show. Rascal does not dream of Bunny Girl Senpai, and so this show continues to go in a lot of different directions that I am very happy about, and the way it portrays them. So, as to be expected, I don't know if you show you remember me talking about last week, but yeah, about how Tomoe and Sakuta, the boy, they had to go on a date so that they can get out of this weird time loop that they're in and finally move on and go back to the normal timeline. And so they decide to have this very good final date on the beach where they go swimming, they eat grilled corn and shaved ice, they build sandcastles. They basically do all the things that, a happy couple would do. Um, you would kind of call this the swimsuit episode, but they did only spend about 10 seconds on the actual shot where she's in a swimsuit. Like, it wasn't even that long. So it's another thing that I kind of appreciate, that the show doesn't really, go there. It keeps its focus on the characters and not about the fan service or anything like that. It definitely wasn't really that show to begin with. There was that shot, of course, of her in a bunny girl outfit, Mai in a bunny girl outfit in the library, but that was also like a couple minutes. It was pretty short, all things considered.
Hmm. I
Um,
always thought she was going to be wearing that outfit the entire series. It's kind of a
no,
relief to hear that they kind of subverted your expectations with that.
exactly. I mean, it was mentioned before, but Maya only used it so that she could get people's attention immediately if they noticed her. But because they didn't, it was kind of like, say, someone walking around naked, like, did they see me? For her, it's wearing this bunny girl outfit that she wore once in like in a previous commercial that she did. So that's the kind of
Got
thing
it.
that she did. Um, So, unfortunately, it appears as a result of the two breaking up, it's another round of Groundhog's Day. It turns out this time it's only happening to Sakata. It turns out that this phenomenon causes people to, inadvertently force themselves to admit when they're lying. This is when the show takes a very interesting turn, because if they don't admit themselves, time can't advance. As a result, this is how Sakata learns that Tomoe has feelings for him. Like, no matter, like, that's the only logical conclusion that he can draw. Is there's no other explanation. That's pretty much, it smacks him right in the face, clear as day. Um, and to me, that's what makes Sakata a far more interesting protagonist than you typically see in a lot of this romantic anime. He's not oblivious in the slightest. He's like, okay, why can't time advance? What big event happened? We broke up. She clearly wants to stay together with me. She clearly has feelings for me. Um, and we hear from herself that she doesn't want this feeling to end, so she is basically forcing the final date to repeat. She lies to Sakata and saying like, "Oh, I don't know, it's time's going on normal," and she's repeating these days on her own volition. But at the end, and this is what the shot is from, she finally admits her feelings towards him, that she loves him, even if she's fully aware that he only is fully in love with Mai and doesn't have those types of feelings against for Tomoe. Um, it turns out once this event happens, and they end the repeating day, this entire previous 3 weeks was one huge simulation of the future. So time never
Huh.
proceeded since the first time I talked about Groundhog's Day in that previous episode. So both, they're still fully aware of what happened. Tomoe and Sakata, they knew what went on when they decided to spend all the time up until summer break dating each other. And it turns out that Tomoe apparently can read the future. It's pretty insane. So
Huh.
they loop themselves back twice to get back to this time in June where the final date took place in the middle of July. So yeah, all this was one big simulation about what potentially could happen in the future if things go down this road. But fortunately, Tomoe decides to uh, cooperate and turn down that dude, that awful man that was going to call her a whore anyway. So, yeah, it's some shitty stuff going on, but she was able to get herself out of that altogether. So, yeah, this show goes places, and I love it. And I, once again, like to offer my appreciation for Takuta as being a really good protagonist, because he's not oblivious. He's like, okay, she likes me. I know this because there's no other reason that we can't get past this day, this final date. Because imagine repeating the final date of some girl that you actually end up liking or something like that over and over and over again. It's like they have to repeat the same exact format. It's not until they decide to take a fork and go someplace else rather than the beach that they can get out of it. And that's why I think the show is probably an example of a really good fall show, whereas some others have been disappointing. And so I think that I can't speak enough good things about this show. Yeah. So moving on from that, we can talk about another show that both you and Deanna have been watching, Yusha, and that's Run with the Wind. With Serious McGee over here. And so talk to us a little bit about this show for this episode this week.
Okay. Well, last week, Sirius McGee was having an issue running with the team because he was out looking for jobs and trying to live his life. But Haiji is very insistent about getting these guys to run, and he kind of lashes out at the very end and refuses. So that kind of carries over into this week, and we see that Shindo, the other third year, who hasn't yet started looking for jobs but knows that's on the horizon for him, is the first one to reach out and try and cheer him up, but that doesn't really work out. Haiji also tries to convince King that running would be good for him and that he's trying to help him in his own way, but this just kind of pisses him off more because King just sees this as lip service and that he's just very self-serving and that he's manipulating this team. And I would very much agree with that. Um, but basically, while the team's running and spending their time trying to promote the club by wearing these like jerseys that they drew up themselves, uh, he's kind of just gambling, killing time, uh, in between, moments where he's going to job fairs and hunting for jobs. And eventually, Shindo gathers the courage to go to King's room and talk to him about what's going on and what's bothering him, and he kinda hits him with this weird reasoning where he says, "Like job hunting, it's not something you want to do, it's something you have to do. Running is the same way, and so you might as well like it and be forced to do it than hate it and be forced to do it." And for some backwards reason, this convinces King to run with the team the next morning.
All right.
Um, yeah, I'll get into that, trust me. Um Basically, after that, the team has, like, another training session, and everyone's all encouraged because their times have gone up, but they kind of curb this enthusiasm with, Kakeru having a conversation with Haiji saying, "These guys are not gonna be ready for the Hakone Ekiden," which is the marathon that they're trying to run, and that they would just be happier practicing as a team and running for fun despite or instead of going out trying to be professionals at it and just getting stomped by these other teams that have been doing it for years and training and making it their lives. Haiji, on the other hand, is very adamant to continue running. He says that that kind of defeat would only be good for the team and that it would help them grow. And that's kind of where the episode ends. And this one didn't really hit me very well. I very much, I think we can all identify with King's struggles with trying to find a job and trying to move on with his life and not really having time for random hobbies and interests, especially one that he's being forced into doing by Haiji, this character who's supposed to be very optimistic and go lucky, happy go lucky, and I just kind of see him as this spoiled kid who's like, "Yeah, let's run. We all have to run, and I'm going to force you to run despite all the shit that you guys have going on in your own lives." And I just wish something would happen. Like I wish some of the team members would leave or like someone would chew him out or maybe they go to this meet and they just get destroyed and I hope he like adapts a little bit because he's being very strange with this approach that he's taking and
Yeah.
I think part of it
Pushy.
might come from this need of his to run after his injury. He had this bad injury and a surgery, and he couldn't run for very long. And so now that he's healed up, I think he just wants to keep running. And so he was so desperate to find a team that he just gathered this like mismatched A team to go running. And I want that desperation to come out, but it just doesn't seem to be happening. And Shindo's justification of why King should be running just seemed very bizarre. Like yeah, Haiji was forcing me to run and I hated it, but, if I'm being forced to do it, I might as well like it, and I'm like, "That's Stockholm syndrome, isn't it?" Like, you're
I
you're
like
being
it here.
forced to run.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, it's like, I'm being tortured for so long that now I just kinda like it, and you
it's
should
well,
too, and it's like, no, King's kind of in the right. He's gonna be graduating in a year, and he needs to find a job and move on with his life. He doesn't have time to be being forced to do something he's not interested in doing,
I mean, cross
and
country was
just
torture in some cases, but it's still
I'm
fun.
sure, yeah.
That's weird.
I mean, you appreciated it at the end of the day, I'm sure, like,
Yeah.
you enjoyed it to an extent. King does not have that, and so,
Mm,
just this weird justification just kind of fell on deaf ears for me, personally.
yeah.
Um, I do like some of the character moments that happened here, like, Kakeru is definitely lightening up as a main character. He's not just this, Sasuke-esque, like, calm and collected, he has his little comedic moments, and
Mm.
other characters are having a lot of fun, but the way these characters are coming around to the idea of being forced to run with this maniac who's like pretty much bribing them to do so, it's not very believable. And instead of making some of these characters endearing to me, it makes them seem kind of manipulative and kind of half baked in my eyes. I don't know. I'm hoping it gets better later because it has been pretty good up until this point, and some of the characters 180s towards the idea of running have been believable and enjoyable, but maybe just this one was a weak point for me. I do plan on continuing it, but we'll see where it goes from here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm just reading. I've been reading through Deanna's notes a little bit as I listen to you talk, of course, and she doesn't seem to touch too much about the negative aspects that you had with the episode itself. And so let me just go through a little bit. So she also kind of felt like King's resolution felt a little rushed, like it sounds like you did. But for an anime with so many characters and Keen gets 2 episodes, I think it's still a little better than most. I guess she's comparing so far. Also, there isn't Haiji, who he trusts the least, that inspires him, but Shindo, who she considers to be the contender for best boy. uh, each character has their own motivations to run, and sure, maybe they're inspired by everyone else, but it's not like they were convinced right from the get go. And that's kind of important. It's like, yeah, we all have our own reasons, and I did too when I was involved in cross country and track going through several years in school. Um, they really kept asking the question of why am I here? What does running mean to me? And she found that it was great that they're touching on reality versus a pipe dream. These boys are in college and they do have to think about the future with jobs and money and so on. But running's going to help them find some perspective during a time when they might feel lost or pressured, like Keen is. And I think that's important. I mean, for me, that's a lot for me. It was like running. It really opened your mind and helped me study more because I was able to find some outlet for the stress and the pressure. And so if all Kane
Mhm.
was doing is focusing only on finding another job and not trying to relieve that pressure valve, I think that would really get to him. I do like how she notices like it's a little frustrating that the unit of measure is in kilometers instead of miles, but that's only because we in America don't want to be different from the rest of the world. I should say we want to be different from the rest of the world. And so she mentions trying to get a sense of how long each of them has to run and the build up. Someone who's been in cross country, like I said, and done all these races, I can only imagine if it was like 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers. 5 is 3.1, 10 is 6.2. So it's something
Thank
that
you.
you kind of pick up on that stuff from being a part of that. She found to be there were several moments from the episode that were hilarious. For example, Kakeru being the slowest when it comes to team dynamic, and he hurries to put on the shirt. So that's just his little thing. Everyone's smug grins during the episode. A prince asking Yuki to run away with him, but Yuki drags him under the bus by saying they'd get caught because he's too slow. And Kakeru's smile. She also likes Kakeru's smile. And she does pose the question, do you believe Haiji's I'm here for you was just lip service, or did he actually mean it?
I I want to say it's lip service almost because I feel like maybe he's experienced the benefits that come with running, and he's very adamant to have these team members of his experience it as well. But I do feel like there is a bit of selfishness in there where it's like Nico explained earlier that he had this bad injury and that because of the resulting surgery, he wasn't able to run for a very long time.
Yeah.
But he wants to run so badly that maybe he's just like gathering this mismatched team. And despite it not being healthy, he's forcing them to go into this marathon. So it might be lip service in my eyes, but knowing how sports anime handle their characters, especially the mentor characters like Haiji, they're probably gonna twist it in some way to make it sound like he's doing it for their benefit.
Yeah, he learns the team dynamic as was mentioned. It's important because yeah, like I was injured in the middle of my running career and I was really upset and really bothered by it because as someone who's been on his feet all his life, like being off your feet for a long time really sucks. It's an awful feeling and it's basically like cabin fever when you can't do anything, you can't go outside without assistance. So, yeah, I can only imagine what he was going through. At least that's the character that they're portraying. Well, let's move on from that, from Run with the Wind, and let's talk about SSSS Gridman. I like this shot quite a lot because there was a quite the revelation in this episode that I took a big turn for the show, and I'm trying to convince Deanna to watch this show as well because I don't know about you, new show, but I'm really enjoying my time.
Oh, I am. I'm definitely having fun.
Yeah, so let me kind of run down what we saw in this episode. So I want to say first off, I'm glad Hibiki is pretty self-aware, considering Akane made sort of an offhand comment when talking to him about transforming, and that didn't go unnoticed by him. Like he picked that up right away, and I was like, good. He didn't just ignore that. That's a big part, a big point. But it also seems that Akane isn't sitting around and waiting for Hibiki to learn more, since she's so positive of the connection between Hibiki and Gridman. So instead, she sends Auntie off to kill Hibiki with the promise that Gridman won't show up anymore, since Auntie keeps saying that his only enemy is Gridman. So it's like, okay, well, if you take care of this guy, he'll get rid of the other guy as well. So instead, Rika ends up finding Auntie, feeds him, and gives him a bath back at his place, back at her place, since she's being so maltreated by Akane. So I can only imagine that there's something going to happen with that. Um, I also like to say I love that throughout the episode, the Neon Genesis Junior High students are all highly observant of what's going on with the Gridman Alliance, who appear to be taken fully advantage of, including Akane getting close to Sho. So I do like that they just, you can always see them right outside of eyesight. Like Caliber is just right there, just like, yeah, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing what's going on. Um, I think that it was kind of crazy that he meets this girl in an alleyway who turns out to be a kaiju, a human form of the kaiju that can grow up to be really big, as this shot shows. So this is kind of crazy because we're only about, was it like episode 5 or 6? She straight up tells Hibiki that Akane is the source of all the kaiju being formed in the city. Um, and so there's no more playing around the bush. Everyone else obviously knows because we've been watching the show so far, but now the characters themselves are fully aware of what's going on here. And so, as is explained, Akane is destroying and fixing the city how she sees fit, with nothing existing outside of it. So that's why in the previous episode, when they're going to the beach, or to the riverside, everyone falls asleep. Everyone thinks like, oh, they're just tired from the trip. No, it's because there's gas on the train that makes them fall asleep, so they don't know that actually there's nothing outside the city. So that also includes, besides removing parts of the city, she's also removing people she doesn't like the volleyball team. She's basically a god, and that's quite the setup here. And so Hibiki learns all of this when he encounters a kaiju, and that's what this girl is. She's been here all along, throughout all of the stuff that's been happening with Akane. And so I just want to say, I'm not going to dwell on too much. It's kind of interesting how coincidental that we're watching this show and we're watching another show that's got some of the same themes. So we're going to get to that later. But boy, this is going to be kind of funny, kind of funny from my own context about what's going to happen. So yeah, once again, just a great episode. I love the presentation of this show, like the shots they use. It's fantastic. The character designs, how Akane, like, even if she's looking at somebody, like her eyes go huge and her face gets gigantic. Everything is so set up well, and you can really tell like the personality of these characters, and I'm loving it. What'd you think about this new show?
I really appreciate the fact that they kind of broke form here for this show. Like every episode has had the big mech fight with Gridman and like some kaiju, and I like that we finally had an episode that broke form and
Yeah,
also
touched
explained a
on
little bit of the mystery behind what's going on with these kaiju attacks. Like the revelation that everything outside of this town is decimated was a shock to me, at least. Um, I do like Akane as a villain now, like seeing that she's just a child who was given these godlike powers and she's using them in very believable ways. Like if you were a kid who could create a monster and just like hurt whoever did the slightest wrongdoing to you, I feel like a lot of kids would fall into that given that crazy power. Like
it. Yep,
a
immature.
teacher just bumps into, yeah, exactly, that immaturity and like the unproportional response to someone slighting you, like your teacher bumps into you and you're like, kill him. And so
Like, I
I
don't like this
totally
guy. I'm
see
uncomfortable. I want to get rid of him. Yeah, it's that easy.
exactly, yeah. And so like I do like her as a villain now. She's like this really messed up child who's just given way too much power than she has any right having right now. I also do like that she has that pseudo date with Hibiki's friend. I'm kind of blanking on his name right now. The green-haired one. Um and they
Whose
kind of
friend?
Yuta's friend, the one with
Utah.
glasses.
Oh, you mean Hibiki's friend at show? Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Uh, they kinda mentioned offhand when they were talking about their favorite, like, kaiju shows and movies that, like, it would be strange when they would watch an episode and a kaiju didn't show up, like a giant monster attacking the city, and that's ironically kinda what happened in this episode.
Yeah.
Um, I will say that the fight scene between Max Caliber and Anti was really, really intense, and it was nice to see a 2D fight scene handled with the same finesse and choreography that the CG fight scenes have been handled with so far, and I'm
Oh, yeah.
hoping we get more of that because that fight scene was incredible. It was great seeing Caliber just, like, bust out the swords and do some fighting of his own for once. So
It's kind of crazy because it's like, Kill la Kill, as far as I remember, didn't really use CG much.
mm-mm.
If anything, it was probably during like the destructive moments. That makes sense. Like when the city's falling apart. But for the fight scenes themselves, it was completely 2D. So you like remembered, yeah, this is Trigger, and they're really good at this, and so it
Yeah,
makes
they can
sense
pull this off.
exactly. And it was a really good watch, like you said. Like you can tell like how bloodthirsty NT was, and so
Oh, yeah.
going to see where things are going to go from here. And even at the end, NT did not follow through and kill Hibiki, so he's sitting at the gates. He's like, "I'm waiting for you to send me off to go attack Gridman." And Akane does that thing where she just throws her phone in his face and just knocks him. Oh, I feel so bad for the guy.
Poor kid. At least he's bathed and fed now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Like apparently he didn't even know what a bath was, and I can only imagine what he smelled like at that point. Oh my god. Holy shit. Okay. So moving on from SSSS.Gridman, we can talk a couple last shows that we're watching before we move on. We've got Surune, the Japanese boy archery club. So yeah, the whole thing for this is that you know let me get to my notes. Actually, I'm kind of missing my notes here. Okay, here we go. I got like two different pieces of notes coming up here, one for Deanna, one for me, so I'm kind of lost a little bit. Okay, so they basically have this whole setup where Nano-kun, who's the boy that's super popular, his own fan club, they do kind of address that because of his behavior that he's scaring off all the other girls, which at some point it's like you gotta wonder if if that was gonna happen or not. And then you got Kachan, who has such an intimidating presence that also scared off a bunch of different members as well, the potential members. But then they pretty much say, okay, they probably weren't going to stick around anyway. They're just giving up their own excuses for why they're leaving the club. And so it's like, okay, we knew this was going to happen. Let's go ahead and move on from there. And so from there, it's like, what I can only gather from this episode is that I'm having kind of a difficult time liking a lot of the different characters in this show. So far, outside of the girls who are great, I think Ryohei is the only other interesting person. He's the person that's got like he's full of charisma, um, whereas the rest are kind of either a little irritating or just plain bland. And so even the main character Misaki is like, I guess. Um, there's all these people that are asking why Misaki developed target panic, and I thought it was pretty clear that it's because his mom died, that the pressure amplified to the point that he lost all confidence in practically anything that he does, including firing an arrow correctly. Um, so I just don't know about this show. It feels like the moment Misaki gets over his target panic, all the stakes kind of fall apart. But at the same time, I guess it's just like, facing competition will probably be enough. It'll be like that scene in Robin Hood. It's like, do you find the guy who's better than you across from you? It's like, I don't know if that's going to be enough. But there were also a series of coincidences that were like, okay, this is kind of dumb. So Ryohei ends up meeting someone who can teach him about target panic, who just so happens to be a veteran of a rival school they'll be facing. The odds. And then Masa-san ends up being their coach, who's the boy with the the half exposed chest, the guy that tried to help Misaki in last episode. He ends up being the coach of their team. Of course, it's all one big series of coincidences. So I guess there's also this moment that when Masa-san shows up, and that's what this image is that I used for the thumbnail. Misaki and Kaito will be fighting over Masa-san because they're like, Masa-san, huh? Does that little shot of like looking at each other. It's like, oh, you know who he is? And they had like these stars in their eyes, so yeah, it's clearly there's something going on here. So let me read off of Deanna's notes because a lot of it is in agreement with the stuff that I talked about. So Ryohei is a bit much. I can agree with that, but he's probably my favorite. She said it's her favorite out of all the other boys right now because his intentions are pure and selfless. Kachan also knows Masa-san, which is really interesting. So Masa-san is probably going to be how Kachan and Minato, I think I kept calling him Misaki, but yeah, it's Minato, how they finally get along. She mentioned how she loved the background scenery work, like the archery shop that Ryohei visits. It looks realistic and drawn over, and then the animators put the characters over it, so kind of typical for what a lot of these scenes end up being look like, but they did the research, which is what she's trying to say. And then Minato is working hard despite being a sulky boy over the first 2 episodes. Yeah, he's been pretty sulky. The students explaining why they decided not to commit to the club. Anogi is a bit... I thought it was cute how he mentions it later and feels a little self-conscious, even if asking if he really is the reason they didn't join. And so yeah, it's like Kachan was just basically saying like, is that really why? Is it because I'm my attitude? I don't know. She says she can't get a feel for the characters like I do, but she does love the girls. And I love the comment about how Seo can beat anyone in terms of charisma and good looks. And I'm like, yes, she can. She's the female captain, by the way. So yeah, the other girls are like, oh, she's so great. And it's like, yeah, she is. She's pretty great. She says she's happy to see them have more lines in this episode, but let them do the tournament too. So that's kind of the thing. Like, move on from all this. Let's get to the tournament and finally have some action because right now it's kind of dragging. But we also get a glimpse of the rival school's archery club. Dun dun dun. She literally types dun dun dun, by the way. So yeah. That's kind of the gist of it, is that the show's dragging on quite a bit in the first few episodes, so hopefully the tournament can kind of recover itself and make things more interesting, especially developing the characters more, because right now, once again, I think me and Deanna can both agree, most of them are kind of one note, so we'll see. And that leads me to the last show of the recap, and I'll be kind of quick with this because we've been going on for a while. So yeah, the whole episode revolved around Junko, not accepting modern approaches to being an idol with regards to photo ops. So she's one of those old school idols from like, I think it's like the 80s. And I guess it's their way of developing her character when she talked about how there were clear boundaries between the idols and their fans. It's this argument between being an ideal or perfect figure compared to a person who is relatable and grows over time, thinks the fans like the modern idol tends to be. It's like, I'm not perfect, but with your help, I'll be better. That's kind of what she's like, I don't know if that's the real thing. So we also learn how Junko and Ai got killed. So we learned that Ai got killed in the middle of a thunderstorm during a concert, getting struck by lightning while she was performing on stage. She basically went out with a bang, which is pretty rad. And it's a pretty good... This is her. Like, how many people did she scar from dying in the middle of a concert? Like, that's her being killed by a lightning bolt in the middle of a thunderstorm. So, yeah. It's an interesting metaphor because Junko was above her fans because she died in a plane crash. Like, she was like, I think it was like a thunderstorm or something like that. Like in the sky, her plane got the engine went out and she crash landed. So she was above her fans, literally. And then I was on the ground on the fans level. That's when she got killed. So it's a weird, like it's like a visual metaphor that was kind of interesting. I still don't get how the fans wouldn't recognize I, because that whole event, this shot of her dying in the concert, it was only 10 years ago. And they even have this exact same hairstyles and everything. And so I think they would kind of know, like, okay, hey, you're still alive. That's crazy. It's like, it looked like she had, like, she talked about how she had tens of thousands of people seeing her in concert. Kind of doesn't seem like it if they don't recognize her from all these public appearances. And they're going to be performing at the same rock show that she was here. So, I don't know. it's also a bit weird that both Junko and I have been nothing but dramatic this entire time, like the entire show so far, while the rest of are doing their best and having like some comedic fun. So I'm having a kind of difficult time enjoying their characters because they're so serious. So hopefully they kind of loosen up a little bit, because right now it's like it's a weird contrast that it's only these two people that are being serious about everything and kind of giving the show some gravity, while the rest are just dumb zombies pretty much at the most part and just having a good time. So I don't know, we'll see how that grows from there, but that's kind of my feeling from this. All right, let's move on from that. Let's talk about the show that we agreed last week to watch through, and that's Neon Genesis Evangelion. I'm pretty excited about this. So, yeah, just to mention, like I mentioned before, I personally have seen the entire series, including the movies, about 5 years ago. And so it's been long enough that I can appreciate watching this again. I mean, I need any excuse to watch this again. But of course, you, Nusha, and Deanna, you both have not seen it. Nusha, have you ever seen any episodes of this show?
I haven't even seen like clips of this show. Well, I've
Oh.
seen like one or two, but I've never read through the plot or anything like that.
Oh, this is gonna be very interesting because you'll quickly find out watching this show how many other anime reference this anime to death. Like, there's a lot of shots that you'll see. Like, I remember seeing that in another show, and I'm sure you saw that in the second episode quite a bit. Um, so let me just give a quick synopsis of episode 1, because we're watching the first 2 episodes. We're talking about them anyway. So the episode begins with a being known as an alien an alien attacking the city of Tokyo 3. At the same time, a 14-year-old boy named Shinji Ikari arrives at the demand of his father, Gendo Ikari, who is the commander of NERV, which is a UN agency organized to defeat the angels by any means necessary. So these giant creatures are known as angels. So after meeting up with Masato Katsuragi while encountering the angel known as Sachiel on the way to NERV's secret headquarters, he learns that his father is dead set pretty much on forcing him to pilot the Evangelion Unit 01, and immediately puts him into combat with the angel. As one would expect, despite the fact that Shinji is able to sync up with his Eva unit so well, he is clearly out of his element here, as the episode ends with Eva experiencing severe head trauma after Sachiel sends him flying across the city. So, I don't want to give too many of my own thoughts because I'm pretty set on my own opinion of these episodes. So, Nusho, what'd you think of episode 1 of Evangelion?
I was I mean, I'm definitely thrown for a loop. Like, we were definitely thrown into everything so quickly. Like,
Yes.
I do really like how creepy and eerie the angel is. Like, just as this like brainless creature just attacking them for no reason, or at least as far as I know, it did come off as very threatening and eerie, and so I did really appreciate that. I wasn't expecting Shinji to actually ride the Eva, because I thought the meme was he never gets into the Ava. Like, the whole meme was
Oh,
ride the goddamn machine. Like,
he does. He does.
yeah,
Whether he likes it or not, he had to. It's because of Ray that ends up doing it, because it's either him or Ray, and he's obviously cares about other people, to the point that he doesn't want anything bad to happen to this person that he only is known for a few seconds. So yeah.
yeah, that was definitely a redeeming quality of his. Is like, he's this scared boy, but he sees that his inability to do anything would throw this injured woman back out into the battlefield, and so it was nice to see him kind of gather the courage to finally get in and attack this thing, even though he had no idea what he was doing. But I
And
don't want to talk
also,
too
I
much
mean,
about
he's
the next
under the
episode.
thumb of his dad, so it's like, like it's also because he's easily to manipulate. He's a tool basically.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's the other problem.
Yeah,
But yeah.
and I wonder if he still wants to like gain his dad's favor, which is probably why he showed up in the first place.
Oh,
So
you'll see. You'll see.
okay,
You'll
I'm
see where
excited.
it goes. But yeah, I think that's definitely on his mind. Anything else? That's pretty much.
Um, yeah, episode 2 is what I have most of my thoughts on
Oh,
because
okay. Well, let me quickly go over
no,
Deanna's notes for episode 1. Once again, she couldn't make it because of her sore throat, so I wanted to quickly mention what she had left here. So, she briefly just mentions that she saw the first episode earlier this year because she wanted to check this off her list, but I think she was swamped with other anime that she couldn't continue with it. She says she's just as confused as to what's going on. Shinji's just thrown into this whole situation, and at the end, he's like, "Okay, let's do this." It's kind of like what you were talking about. Um, he can't even give his father enough shit for abandoning him because an angel is attacking the Hainer. So yeah, it's like they're obviously in a, everything's in a quick pace right now. They have to hurry. She does mention, which is also a fun fact, Misato is voiced by the same voice actress as Usagi from Sailor Moon, the main character. So she can't get over how she's the one voiced in the previews, and it's like she's watching Sailor Moon all over again. Um, she says she loves that they have a lot of female characters working in this whiskey field, and they're in high ranked positions. Absolutely, they're at the top pretty much. So she says it was a bad move on her part to have watched Darling in the Franxx because before this, because she can't stop seeing the parallels, even though I'm sure Eva is much better, and obviously it was out long before Franxx. And kind of like what you're talking about, the animation looks amazing for a 90s anime, and the opening and ending songs
Mhm.
are the bops. And so yeah,
Oh, they're
it's
great.
they're so good. They're so fucking great. You'll love the fact that there's some great music in this series. But yeah, that's the kind of the big part, is just that you know, every episode is so well crafted. Just to, full disclosure, this is my favorite anime of all time, so that's why I'm kind of talking about it in so loving fashion. But yeah, it's there's so much budget in each shot in each episode, and you can really tell how well crafted it was. There's a reason why it was so well regarded as it is, and why it's so damn expensive that even thinking about localizing the Blu-rays, for example, is near to impossible, because this is a show that's high above pretty much anything else. So let's move on then. Actually, I want to show the shot from episode 1. I didn't give that. That's the shot. One of the more iconic shots here is that, of course, Gendo, Shinji's dad, talking down to him, and all you see is a bunch of shots of Shinji on the monitor. Don't know why they need 6 shots of him, but there you go. That was definitely for effect. And let's talk about episode 2. So, this whole thing begins, kind of a surprise, is that episode 2 starts with Shinji waking up in a hospital bed with no memory of the fight against the angel, only the night prior. Since his dad wants nothing to do with him, Masato offers to become Shinji's legal guardian and have him stay in her apartment. And so, as he's lying in bed, and of course when he's in the bath as well, he starts to recall the fight that he had with Sachiel, the angel of the first episode. Apparently, Unit 01 went berserk and attacked Sachiel, destroying his AT field barrier and forcing him to self-destruct in response, because of course he got so close he was going to get killed anyway. Um, so yeah, that was the big part of that, and I wanted to mention, as we go through another shot of this, is that actually I forgot to pull this in. Let me pull this up real quick, because there's something that I noticed in this episode that some people may have not quickly picked up on. Here we go. So yeah, in this episode, there is a visual parallel. So Evangelion is filled to the brim with a lot of visual references, and like I said, the parallels that are worth taking a look at. For example, the shot of Rachiel lifting Unit 01 by the head is later portrayed in the same episode by Misato grabbing Shinji by the head as he makes like smart cracks about the
Huh.
food that they've got. So yeah, there's a lot of this kind of stuff. If I flip the picture, it's pretty much identical. You can see the elbow and everything. So there's a lot of that stuff you should keep a lookout. But also, every shot that's framed, there's a lot of that stuff in here, and so that's why it's worth paying attention to what you're seeing, because you might see some cool stuff like this every now and then. So yeah, it's not coincidence; it's intentional. Is basically it. So Nusha, what are your thoughts on episode 2? Because a lot of shit goes down, and you get an idea of what the show's really gonna throw you through a loop. It's very
Oh, yeah.
psychological.
Yeah, episode 1, I was like, "Okay, typical mecha, whatever," and then episode 2 really got me hooked. So, I wasn't expecting, like, the happy tone and the cheeriness that came with, Shinji living with Misato and everything, and them driving through town and looking at the city that Shinji inadvertently rescued. Um, but I really, really did appreciate the you mentioned it, like, the subversion of him waking up in that hospital bed, and then you think, "Oh, he got his ass kicked," and then you even see the shot of Ray being wheeled by in that bed again, and she looks injured, and you thought, "Oh, okay, he passed out, and she went out in his stead and took care of this angel," and then you cut to see what really happened, and his mech just went, like, bonkers and destroyed this thing. causing it to self-destruct. So I really did appreciate that. And you were talking about parallels. Um, the scene in episode 1 where they drop, like, the nuke on the angel, and he's just kinda walking through it unscathed, and then this episode, you see the angel blew up, and then Shinji's Eva is just walking through it unscathed in very much the same fashion, like,
Yes,
all the
yes.
flames and the black silhouette, like, I if you're saying there's more of that in there, then I'm really excited to see what happens because I really did appreciate that little callback to just 1 episode earlier.
Yes, there's a lot of it, and that's a great example as well of them doing things like that to kind of, it's like a gift for people who are paying attention, basically. And that's I
Mhm.
think that's something that I noticed more. And on the second watch, like I am doing right now, it's I'm appreciating things that I may have not noticed the first time, and it's stuff like this that really helps me appreciate this and makes it all worthwhile. So I want to
Yeah.
mention what Deanna mentioned in her notes here. It's that uh, she also, like you talked about, when they cut from battle to Shinji laying in the hospital bed, it surprised her. And so it was pretty abrupt, and we didn't see how Shinji survived the attack until near the end. And so when the Ava goes berserk, that whole fight just got so much better. So she also really appreciated how like it's like how nuts it went, and how it's not that Shinji ended up losing the battle. It's that, oh, he so much won that battle quite
Yeah.
convincingly as well. And yeah, and just like her, what everyone else in the world thinks, Gendo is an asshole. He's abusing these children for his own selfish causes. He's not worried about Rei at all. Just if she's able to go back to the fray and fight. Oh, she's going to learn more about their relationship later on. Um, she says can't believe that he was about to force her to pilot the Ava when she was still on a hospital bed. So yeah, Shinji was obviously in trouble there, and he was just like, go get her. She does like the dynamic between Masato and Shinji. She seems like a big sister. I could tell that he's been alone for most of his life. Um, and she just makes the comment that the poor woman needs a better diet instead of beer. It's like, no, that is her diet. But yeah, these episodes, she kind of caps it off by saying these episodes flew by so fast, and it's been really interesting so far. Can't wait to see more of Rei and other characters. Yeah, they all. That's the great thing. This show goes on if I'm not mistaken, for 26. Yeah, 26 episodes. They all get their time, a lot of time, and I think that's important. That there's no real like flat characters, one note characters. Everyone gets plenty of time to be developed, and you start to care about a lot of them. Other than maybe some of the bad guys. That's like the only thing you can say, or at least some of the more ominous figures in this series. Like in episode 2, when you saw those people sitting around chairs, not as much, but that's not really needed because it's the people that
Mhm.
you want to care about, like Shinji and Rei, and some of the other people coming up here really soon that you'll start to really like. So yeah, on that note, we can go ahead and wrap up this episode. And so, once again, I'd like to thank New Shop being a part of this. Thanks again for Deanna sending me her notes. Obviously, we hope that she recovers from her health issues and is back again with us next week for yet another edition of Anime Review. So, thank you all there for listening, and catch us next time. Bye, everyone.
Later, guys.